Hi, and welcome back. In this lesson, we will cover the first collaborative elicitation technique called interviewing. Let's first look at the definition of an interview. An interview is a conversation between an interviewer and an interviewee where information is obtained. The interviewer will ask a series of questions and the interviewee will provide answers to those questions. Sounds quite straightforward, right? But interviews are what makes the world go round for consultants and business analysts. You could say that conducting interviews became like a second nature for them, as it is such a powerful tool. Let's go over some of the characteristics that we can distill from this definition. It involves two parties, the interviewer and interviewee. Note that multiple settings are possible here. It's possible that you have one interviewer and multiple interviewees. It's possible that you have multiple interviewees and one interviewer. It's possible that you have multiple interviewers and interviewees, and simply one interviewer and one interviewee. Another characteristic is the fact that an interview is a conversation, meaning that both parties are allowed to exchange words. Next, the goal of an interview is to obtain information. In our case, it is to elicit requirements and find answers to the questions that were listed in the elicitation preparation phase. A characteristic that is not included in the definition is whether interviews are structured or not. There are three types of interview structures. The first one being you have interviews that are not structured. The interviewer just has an idea of the main problem that he or she wants to solve, but no further preparation was done in terms of questions or sub-questions. This means that the interviewee has all the freedom to go beyond the scope of the interview questions. Another type of interview is a semi-structured one. The interviewer has prepared a main problem statement and a couple of sub-questions. This allows the interviewee to provide additional information beyond the scope of the interview questions, but they can't completely go off track. The last type of interview consists of structured interviews. The interviewer has prepared a main problem and a strict set of sub-questions. Note that the interviewee is not allowed to go beyond the scope of the interview questions. My personal favorite is the semi-structured interview because it gives you the best of both worlds. You're certain that you will receive an answer to your questions and you are less likely to omit information that the user might have wanted to provide. It's also less time consuming compared to a structured interview in terms of preparation. When would I use an interview? I would opt for an interview if I'm trying to further my understanding on a specific topic and the knowledge has already been captured by experts. How can you best execute an interview, I hear you ask? I will walk you through the generic steps that an interview should have. Let's assume that I want to organize a 1-hour interview which happens remotely. This setting happens quite frequently nowadays. First, there is a preparation phase of 10 minutes before the interview where I do the following. I ensure that I rehearse my elicitation plan and the context of the interview. I check whether the person has accepted the invitation or not. If not, I send them a message to ask whether I should reschedule the meeting or if it just goes through. And next, I make sure to be in the call on time. If I'm late, I'll let the person know in advance so that they are not waiting in the call for nothing. Next, there is an introduction phase of 5 minutes where I do the following. I introduce myself, my role, and what the goal is of the interview. Then I let the other person introduce themselves. I also often do some small talk to create a friendly environment. Doing this helps me to build trust with the interview and it enables richer interviews as the person is more at ease. After the introduction phase, the content phase finally starts. I try to limit this phase to 50 minutes. If I need more time, it's best to plan a second meeting. During this phase, I keep the following in mind. I go through the body of my questions, I confirm understanding whenever is needed, and I take notes and detect next steps and/or action points. Now, we're almost there. We have now arrived at the conclusion phase of the interview, but there are a couple important steps that can't be omitted. This part should take about 5 minutes, I would say. So I make a quick summary of what I learned. I go through the next steps and action points that I was able to identify, and I check if I missed something in my summary and my next steps. I organize a second meeting if required. I ask whether the interviewee still has questions or information they would like to share. And I check with the interviewee if I should speak to someone else that also has valuable information. And lastly, I thank the interviewee for their time and I will close the call. Now for the aftercare phase, which should take around 10 minutes. I go through my notes and structure them if needed, and I finally send out meeting minutes to the interviewee and ask him to react if there is something not correct or if something is missing. Now voilà, these are the main steps that I follow in each interview. Moving on now to the pros and cons on interviewing. Starting off with the advantages. Interviews allow to do a deep dive on a specific topic with a subject matter expert. During interviews, you can easily identify conflicts or discrepancies about certain needs or requirements. You can also quickly confirm your understanding with the interviewee. You can easily avoid miscommunications. You can build a relationship of trust with that person. It's quite easy to organize as it mostly involves just two people. It allows you to observe non-verbal communication. And interviews are not expensive to organize. What about the disadvantages? Interviews require access and commitment from stakeholders. Creating structured interviews can be quite time-consuming. It's possible that stakeholders might have difficulties describing their future needs, so the focus is usually on what they do today and not what can be done better in the future. Interviews are prone to subjective mindsets of people, so be careful when people say, I think that, means that it's their own opinion. Fact check this. The resulting documentation is subject to interpretation of the interviewer, that's you or me. It can become time consuming if I do multiple individual interviews. Perhaps I should consider a workshop, which might make it go quicker. There's also not the possibility to do co-creation since there's only one person involved in the room. And finally, the interviewee might provide wrong information due to a lack of knowledge, which is hard to cross-check as you might not know that the information is wrong in the first place. These were the main pros and cons of interviews. I would now like to offer you a couple of tips and tricks that help me to make better interviews. First is do your homework, meaning that you should be prepared for the interview. So rehearse the questions and your elicitation plan. Check the role of the interviewee in advance to make sure that what their rank is in the organization. Schedule interviews at least 2 days ahead of time. Some people might not appreciate that you schedule a meeting with them the same day, unless they ask you to. Respect the person by being on time and display interest in the subject. Also, don't interrupt the interviewee. Match the pace of the interviewee. If they are cautious, try to talk slowly. If they are in a hurry, talk quickly. Doing this might seem weird, but you will unconsciously build a relationship of trust with that person. You should also check your understanding as often as possible in order to avoid misinterpretation. You need to let the interviewee know what will be done or what will happen to the information that they provided after the interview. When the interviewee explains a need or an issue, try asking them to give a concrete example. This will ensure that you understand their situation better. Try to interview 2 or 3 users with the same questions to ensure that you're able to do a cross-check and find any contradictions. Be sure to interview end users who have more practical and real-life insights. If you would just interview senior management about a process, you will get a fairly theoretical explanation, but this can be quite far removed from what's happening in reality. Allow time in your schedule to debrief and finish documentation after each interview. If the interview happens on site, try to conduct the interview in a separate space of the interviewee's usual workspace so that they are not distracted. Make questions open-ended to get richer answers. Close-ended questions, meaning that those are questions that can be answered with a yes or no, do not provide a lot of information. Avoid questions that may present judgment or a conclusion, to not misdirect the interviewee. And my final tip is to structure your questions in a story-like format so that the interview feels more like a natural conversation than just a list with bullet points. Voila! With this information, you should be able to handle interviews easily. Let's move on now to the next technique. See you there. Bye.